It's a new week and there is lots to recap. Let's go! Russians are trying to ensue chaos worldwide. Ukraine might finally get fighter jets. There was a huge social media crackdown on Russian troll farms, and Vladimir Putin's incriminating phone call surfaced. With that, hi, my name is Yewleea and you're watching The Brief, where we talk about everything that happened in and pertaining to Ukraine in the week thus far in about 20 minutes. Let's go! Russians are trying to wreak havoc worldwide. But why? Well, because their long-awaited large-scale offensive has begun, and it is going nothing like what they had imagined. With the big offensive, as they call it, the Russians have big problems. Today we see both what they have planned and that they have already started their offensive. But they do not say that they have started it, and our troops give it a very powerful rebuff. The offensive planned by them is already gradually underway, but this is not the offensive they were counting on, said NSDC Secretary Alexei Danilov. Russians have started their massive offensive in the Luhansk region, everywhere from Kupiansk to Vuhledar. They were sending squads of 6 to 8 troops and platoons of 25 to 50, as long as reckon and force 25 to 100 troops supported by armor. And they were doing it over and over and over again, counting that Ukrainian positions are going to get exhausted, not even because they're not able to defend, but because the artillery is going to get exhausted and unable to resist. However, that did not work out as planned at all, and in the last week alone, Russia first lost over 1,000 soldiers and then over 1,100 soldiers in a single day. These losses are the biggest for the Russian army since February last year. Over the past 2 weeks, the average losses of the Russian Federation are about 824 people daily. That is almost 4 times more than it was in June to July 2022. The Ministry of Defense of Great Britain explains this by the low level of training of those who were mobilized, as well as the inconsistency of actions in the main directions of the offensive, and of course lack of weapons, which is most clearly visible in the directions of Vuhledar and Bakhmut. And as we already know, when Russia cannot win on the battlefield, they try to win by all other means necessary, and that is why they're trying to invoke chaos in other countries. Allegedly, the Russian Federation is planning a coup d'etat in Moldova, said NSDC Secretary Alexei Danilov. Remember how Russians sent PMC Wagner and Kadyrovites to Turkey as rescuers? Well, they may just end up in Chisinau, and the Ukrainian intelligence has passed this information along to the authorities of Moldova. Next on the docket, PMC Wagner is helping Serbian paramilitary formations to start a clash with Kosovo. According to the Kosovo president, the cooperation consists of smuggling weapons and uniforms without identification marks onto the territory of the country. According to him, this covert annexation operation has been in the works for about 6 months and looks nearly identical to the one that happened in Crimea 9 years ago. At that time, Russian servicemen with unidentified uniforms were called Little Green Men, and they were preparing the peninsula for annexation. But the question remains, how will that help Russia in their ambitions in Ukraine? That's easy. Distracting, and distracting. They're hoping that the world is going to focus on something other than Ukraine. But they've tried that before, and while the world is still going to help Kosovo and still going to help Moldova, it is not going to forget about Ukraine. Hey, just me with a quick reminder, please interact with this video by giving it a like, leaving a comment, subscribing to my channel, and turning on all of your notifications, and I will be very grateful. Thank you. And meanwhile, Ukraine has a response to the Russian Federation with the anniversary of the full-scale invasion coming up. Dmytro Kuleba, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, says that it's gonna be one to remember. There will be many important political signals. There will be decisions on sanctions, weapons, there will be symbols of unity. Russia remembers how the world will mark the anniversary of its full-scale aggression against Ukraine. According to him, big events will take place in New York on February 23rd and 24th at the UN General Assembly that's going to be dedicated specifically to the anniversary of Russia's aggression. And because of that, or rather kind of on time, Ukraine might be getting fighter jets at last. Ukraine has submitted the official application for F-16 fighter jets to the Netherlands, and Slovakia is ready to start negotiations on the transfer of MiG-29s, because Kyiv has officially requested the planes from them as well. But the most surprising transfer of jets might happen from the UK. They might send 30 Eurofighter Typhoons. According to their defense ministry, this is exactly the number of older Typhoon jets that they have. And while these particular jets might not change much on the battlefield due to the availability of drones and etc., they will most definitely send a signal to the US to act as well. And speaking of air and air attacks, during a massive airstrike this week, Russia fired more than 50 cruise missiles on the territory of Ukraine, most of which were taken down by our air defense. They're trying to do everything in their power to cause as much damage to our power grid and energy infrastructure as possible. Due to Russia's strikes, Ukraine lost 44% of its nuclear generation. In total, almost 24 TPP power units remain damaged due to constant shelling. If we add to this the fact that the occupation of part of our energy capacities, then Ukraine temporarily lost 44% of nuclear generation, 75% of TPP capacities, and 33% of bloc TPPs. And during this most recent attack, Russian missiles crossed the airspace of Moldova, and the Ministry of Defense of Moldova confirmed the violation of their airspace. The Ministry of Defense, together with the responsible structures of the country, is closely monitoring the situation in the region and strongly condemns the violation of the airspace of the Republic of Moldova. Not only Moldova, but also Romania. And apparently the Ukrainian Air Force had the opportunity to shoot down those missiles over the territory of Moldova and Romania, but chose not to do it because of this. They were afraid that the fragments of the missiles might fall in the territory of the countries and injure civilians. Therefore, they let the missiles fly through and took them down on the territory of Ukraine instead. This is not the first time that Russia has violated airspace of another country, particularly for Ukraine to take down those missiles and for them to fall on the territory of another country just so they could then blame us for what might have happened next. But we didn't bite this time. And this is not the only act of Russian provocation that did not work this week. First, I want you to watch this video that explains to you how Russian propaganda works, and then I'll tell you how it didn't work.
Dictionary of Russian Propaganda. Official Russian News is a portal to the reality of 1984, a novel where a totalitarian regime also created a special language, newspeak, to hide facts and divert attention. It helps justify war crimes and cover up failures. Russian war against Ukraine, a special operation. Occupation of territories is liberation. Russian soldiers with no identification marks are polite people or little green men. Ukrainians are Nazis or Satanists. The legitimate government of Ukraine, the Kyiv regime. Hospital, school, other civilian facility attacked by Russia, a military base. Retreat of troops, goodwill gesture, or de-escalation. Explosions in Russia are just claps. Economic decline, negative growth. Information different from the official propaganda is called fake, and fakes will get you 15 years in prison. Meanwhile, Russian official Mizulina says prohibition is freedom, and rights are the greatest on freedom. Therefore, those who understand the meaning of the words rights and freedom should explain to the Russian authorities the meaning of the words surrender, trial, reparations, and make 1984 just a novel again.
So earlier in the year, there were allegations that Russian troll farms have been tasked specifically with editing Wikipedia entries about Ukrainian artists, noblemen, famous figures, and Russifying them. And that's how we ended up with Wikipedia entries like Russian imperial government figure of Ukrainian Cossack descent in description of the last hetman of Ukrainian Cossack siege, who wasn't of Cossack descent. He was quite literally the Cossack, the last Cossack. But anyways, I digress. Even though they have been making those entries and even though they have been editing history and the truth, it didn't work because the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art has finally recognized Aivazovsky and Rapin as Ukrainian artists. Previously, they have been marked as Russian artists on the site and on the place cards, and now they have been finally recognized as what they are, Ukrainian. And not only that, the museum has also changed the name of the painting by the French artist Edgar Degas, or Degas, pardon my French, literally, from Russian dancers to dancers in Ukrainian costumes, because, well, they're quite clearly wearing Ukrainian vyshyvankas and national costumes. So how are they Russian? And Arkhip Kuiji, an artist who was born in Mariupol, was finally also recognized as Ukrainian and not Russian as he previously was. Under the description of his painting that's called Red Sunset over Dnipro, a memo was added that it was Russians who destroyed his home city of Mariupol. Justice prevails. And meanwhile, in Russia. According to the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, Russia does not have resources for the big offensive that they have been planning for the anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. While information is spreading about a large-scale Russian offensive planned for February 24th, Ukrainian military intelligence reports that on February 24th of last year, Russia has already launched a full-scale offensive, which is still ongoing. However, he has confirmed about certain plans of Russian military to take certain actions, but those actions are not going to be nearly as large as everybody's anticipating. Russians are trying to find weak points in our defense because they need at least some tactical success. Well, you know, when you reach a point in the invasion where you're trying to do anything possible to have at least some tactical advancements, pretty much we know you're losing. And informational warfare, as mentioned before, is where Russia is losing the most this week. TikTok has discovered and blocked a network of Russian bots that were spreading disinformation about the war in Ukraine in European users. In total, almost 1,700 accounts with a total following of over 130,000 people have been blocked on the platform, which is funny because there are so many more accounts than that, and I can tell you that the majority of them are not in Europe. They're in the United States, and they comment on my posts daily. And TikTok kept rejecting this reality, and now, oh my god, look at that, they found bots on their platform? Unbelievable. 1,700 accounts is a start, but it's just a drop in the sea. So I really hope that they're going to have a much larger crackdown on this, because this just looks like, hey look, we are trying to keep you safe, but not really. And from today, Russians officially turned off mobile internet in the captured parts of Luhansk region, so they could not access the real information about what's happening. This has started happening on February 11th, but in some settlements it had started happening about a week ago. In addition, the Russian occupation authorities have also started checking the phones of Ukrainian school children for presence of any pro-Ukrainian materials on them. In last week's brief, we discussed how they have started doing that in Mariupol, and now they're doing that all over the place in order to try and control the narrative, which is another indication of despair and their little disinformation operation crumbling, but that's in the long term. In the short term, that is really bad, because those people are going to be cut off and live in a Russian information bubble. Meanwhile, in the temporarily occupied Tokmak of the Zaporizhia region, residents complain of a very putrid smell lingering all over the city. To hide the number of dead occupiers, the Russian occupiers set up a mobile crematorium on the territory of the Pridniprovska Bayadis enterprise in the town of Tokmak, Zaporizhia region. And because of those mobile crematoria, the corpses and their smell is just filling the city, which again indicates that the losses of the Russian Federation are even larger than we can imagine. And next in the series of Russian unfortunate events, the occupying authorities on the peninsula of Crimea raised the level of terrorist danger in anticipation of the peninsula coming back home to Ukraine. The Russian Occupation Administration of Crimea and the local administration of the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation made a decision to establish a high, yellow level of terrorist danger on the territory of the peninsula. The document states that the units of the FSB of the Russian Federation operating in Crimea need to strengthen control over traffic and the movement of Russian citizens as well as foreigners. Such security measures on the part of the occupiers are a sign of preparation for the start of the operation to liberate the Crimea of the armed forces of Ukraine. This may also indicate the possibility of provocations by the Russian special services against the civilian population of the peninsula with the subsequent transfer of responsibility to Ukraine, reports the main Directorate of Intelligence. But the main thing I'm hearing here is that Russians are preparing for the liberation of Crimea. And they should. As President Joe Biden said, Putin has no chance and he has already lost Ukraine. Putin has no chance. He lost Ukraine. He thought that if he invaded, then first of all, every Russian speaker would meet him warmly and say, "Come in. Secondly, he believed that NATO would fall apart. NATO would not do anything. It would be afraid to act. But none of that is happening, Biden said. He also confirmed the support for Ukraine as indefinite. And with that, we're going to transition to international affairs. The State Secretary Anthony Blinken spoke on the possible transfer of fighter jets. He said that the spectrum of military support for Ukraine is changing. Washington wants Ukraine to return all the territories captured by the Russian Federation. And it's not just Washington. The Swedish parliament supported the government's initiative to grant Ukraine over 406 million in military aid. And as most of you must have heard, Zelensky has spoken in front of the Euro Parliament and in front of the Parliament of Great Britain. And here is the now famous excerpt from his speech. Take a look.
I will explain. It's the helmet of a real Ukrainian pilot. He is one of our most successful aces, and he's one of our kings. And the writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it."
Rumor has it that after this particular speech, some world leaders said, give Zelensky everything he wants. I mean, how can you not? Then Zelensky proceeded to meet with Emmanuel Macron, who awarded Zelensky with the Legion of Honor. And here is the video of that. This is a tribute to Ukraine and its people. Kudos to you, dear Volodymyr, for your courage and loyalty, wrote the French president. Then Zelensky spoke at the Euro Parliament, garnering an incredible amount of support. And then a very peculiar phone call was released. The court in the MH17 case believes that Putin has personally approved the provision of transfer of heavy weapons to the DPR militants. And the reason for that is this phone call. Have a listen.
Да.
Игорь Венедиктович.
Да.
Здравствуйте. Это вас беспокоит Москва, спецкоммутатор. Вас просит Владимир Владимирович.
Спасибо, давайте.
Я правильно попала? Это телефон
правильно.
Плотницкого.
Да.
Хорошо,
Да.
одну секундочку, я вас соединяю. Секунду.
Да, хорошо.
Алло.
Алло.
Игорь Венедиктович, добрый день. Это Мамакин лейтенант, секретарь. Сейчас одну секунду буду соединять.
Да, пожалуйста, хорошо.
Алло.
Да, добрый вечер.
Игорь Венедиктович, добрый день.
Да.
Добрый день, говорю. Здравствуйте.
Да, здравствуйте, господин президент.
Как дела у вас?
Да, спасибо, Владимир Владимирович. Потихоньку.
Потихонечку. Как вы оцениваете вот такую военную составляющую?
Военная составляющая, мне кажется, у нас на достаточно хорошей высоте. Здесь сказать, что мы какие-то слабые.
Обострения никакого нет, не чувствуете?
Обострение периодически есть, но это именно периодически вызвано то сменой дислокации различных воинских частей, то пересменка. Ну, таких особо жестоких пока, слава богу, не было.
А социально-экономическая ситуация?
Социально-экономическая ситуация, мы как бы ее достаточно нормально сдерживаем, нивелируем различными способами, но уровень жизни, конечно же, желает быть лучшим. И у нас как бы есть и вопросы, и предложения, как его повысить, но не всегда нам удается решить эти вопросы.
Я уже и Александру Владимировичу сказал, может быть, мы тогда, я попрошу коллег, которые там стараются вам помочь по различным направлениям, чтобы они мне дополнительно доложили, что там происходит, а может потом увидимся, поговорим, хорошо?
Спасибо, Владимир Владимирович. Но если есть такая возможность, может быть, как-то организация личной встречи для обсуждения этих ряда вопросов.
Я про это и сказал. Я говорю, потом увидимся и поговорим с вами.
Спасибо большое, Владимир.
This is a conversation between President of the Russian Federation Putin with the so-called head of the LPR Igor Plotnitsky in 2017. According to the version of the investigation, conversation, the dictator personally gave instructions on the provisions of heavy weapons to the DPR fighters. The conversation took place on November 15, 2017. This is Putin's first public conversation with the leaders of the LDPR, so-called Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic. And while this phone call incriminates Vladimir Putin in the case of MH17 Malaysian Airlines flight, it also incriminates him in starting the invasion and abetting it from 2014 and on. And due to Russian aggression, lots of countries have been speaking out against Russia and Belarus participating in the Olympics. And at this point, 35 separate countries, including the United States, Great Britain, Germany, and France, has called to remove Russia and Belarus from the Olympics as a coalition. And the Olympic Committee president had a very harsh reaction to that, and something that Ukraine did. Thomas Bach reacted harshly to the Ukrainian intention of boycotting the Olympics. He even hinted at possibly punishing the Ukrainian athletes. He said that not allowing Russian Belarusian athletes to participate would be discrimination against them. Yeah, discrimination against the country that they represent being a genocidal maniac. As I've said previously, the only white flag that Russians should bring is to the Ukrainian battlefield, not to the Olympic Games. And to conclude, Russia's big partner, Serbia, will soon join the coalition of sanctions against them. This moment has been approaching for a long time. It's not about months anymore, said the president Vučić, and that's a plot twist. And with that plot twist, that's all I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and if you have enjoyed this video or found it informative, you know the drill. Please don't forget to like it, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. And as always, check your sources and don't fall for propaganda. And I will see you next time.